Well, it's another Angry Birds type game, only this time you're killing the birds. Hey, everyone turns heel at some point. It's Worm vs. Birds for the iPhone. Just released to the App Store by Chalingo, Worm vs. Birds is the latest game in the Angry Birds style. And yeah, there are plenty of these games, but the difference is that this one's a bit more tongue-in-cheek about it. Birds in the name, birds in the game. Look, it's an obvious thing, so why not be obvious about it? You play Worm vs. Birds by launching stuff. Or I guess, technically you're using a cannon to fire worms. Which, that seems cruel to both the birds and the worms. Each stage has a certain amount of birds, which you're gonna have to take down with a certain amount of worms. Do that, and you move on to the next stage. Fail to do it, and, I don't know, the birds win. It's like Hitchcock. There are 60 levels in total, and actually the puzzles are more straightforward than those in Angry Birds. The complexity you saw in that game, and to an even greater degree in Coco Loco, just isn't here. Worms vs. Birds has a much simpler focus on lining up your angles, not to mention a little bouncy luck. Of course, the gameplay does evolve as things progress, so there are several worms to shoot, each with a different attribute. Some split into several worms, some go through walls. Now, the only problem is, the worms aren't as easily identifiable as the Angry Birds, so it's hard to know what you're aiming until you see the trajectory. Nonetheless, the game plays just fine, and although it's obviously similar to the certain games about birds, it actually plays quite a bit differently. Worms vs. Birds doesn't have nearly the same emphasis on physics and gravity. It's a lot simpler, which works in its favor. There's nothing wrong with taking the Angry Birds concept into new territory. In fact, a game like Coco Loco does Angry Birds better than Angry Birds ever did. That's not the case with this one. Worm vs. Birds is a good game, but this is definitely a case of the earlier bird getting the worm.